My grandfather built the Blackwood cabin with his own hands in the late 70s. It was a modest, beautiful A-frame house nestled deep in the mountain pines, surrounded by quiet hiking trails and a pristine lake. When he passed away, he left the property entirely to me. I cherished that place. It was my sanctuary. My husband, Nate, however, had always hated it. He was a city man who complained about the spotty cellular reception, the smell of pine needles, and the lack of modern heating. For 6 years of our marriage, getting him to visit the cabin was like pulling teeth. That is why his sudden passion for the outdoors was so incredibly jarring. It started in early autumn. Nate announced that he was incredibly stressed at his marketing job and needed a creative outlet. He decided he was going to single-handedly renovate and winterize the cabin for us. Suddenly, he was driving up to the mountain every single weekend, leaving early on Friday mornings and returning late on Sunday nights, smelling faintly of wood smoke and claiming he was exhausted from swinging a hammer. I was thrilled. I thought my husband was finally connecting with my family's legacy. I bragged to my friends about how dedicated he was, completely blind to the agonizing truth. The illusion shattered on a crisp Saturday afternoon in November. A massive cold front was moving into the region, and I knew the old generator at the cabin was unreliable. Worried that Nate might freeze, I packed a thermos of hot stew, bought a few heavy thermal blankets, and drove 2 hours up the mountain to surprise him. I parked my car at the bottom of the long gravel driveway, wanting to walk the final stretch and enjoy the autumn air. As I rounded the bend through the trees, I stopped dead in my tracks. Nate's SUV was parked by the porch, exactly as expected. But, parked right next to it was a sleek, bright red sports car. I slowly walked up to the front window and peered through the glass. The cabin was not under construction. There were no tools, no sawdust, and no paint cans. Instead, the rustic living room had been completely redecorated with cheap, modern furniture. A fire was roaring in the hearth, and sitting on my grandfather's hand-carved rocking chair was a young woman with long blonde hair wearing a plush bathrobe. Nate walked out of the kitchen holding 2 glasses of wine. He leaned down, kissed her deeply, and handed her a glass. I stepped back from the window, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard it physically hurt. I stumbled onto the wooden porch, struggling to breathe, when I heard the front door handle begin to turn. I panicked and ducked behind a large stack of firewood just as Nate and the woman stepped out onto the porch to look at the lake. "It is so beautiful up here, Nate," the woman sighed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "But I really wish we could just post pictures. I hate hiding." "I know, Valerie, I know," Nate murmured, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Just be patient for a few more weeks." I finally convinced her that adding my name to the property deed is a necessary maneuver to save us on property taxes. "The paperwork is already sitting on our kitchen counter at home, and once she signs it?" Valerie asked, looking up at him. Nate let out a quiet, callous laugh that chilled me to my core. "Once my name is legally on that deed, I am forcing a partition sale. She won't be able to afford to buy me out, so the court will force her to sell the cabin to a developer. We take my half of the cash, I file for divorce, and we put a down payment on that beautiful townhouse you wanted in the city. She will be devastated, but she is too gentle to fight back." I sat in the dirt behind the firewood, pressing my hands over my mouth to muffle my own breathing. My husband was not just cheating on me. He was actively planning to steal my grandfather's legacy, force me out of my own sanctuary, and use my inheritance to fund his new life with his mistress. He thought I was a gentle, gullible woman who would just sign away her history because she trusted him. I did not confront them. I waited until they went back inside, quietly walked down the driveway, got into my car, and drove back to the city in absolute, ringing silence. When Nate returned home on Sunday evening playing the part of the exhausted, hard-working husband, I greeted him with a warm dinner. I waited until he was perfectly relaxed on the couch before I picked up the legal documents he had left on the kitchen counter. "I looked over the quitclaim deed, Nate," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "If you really think adding your name to the cabin will help us with the tax burden, I trust you. I will drop these off at the county clerk's office tomorrow morning myself." Nate beamed, his eyes lighting up with barely concealed triumph. "You are the best. It is going to save us so much money, I promise." I did take a drive the next morning, but I did not go to the county clerk to file his fraudulent paperwork. I drove straight to the office of Mr. Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell was a formidable, notoriously grumpy local cattle rancher who owned the 300 acres of land immediately adjacent to the cabin. He had been trying to buy my grandfather's property for 30 years to expand his private hunting grounds, but my family had always refused. I walked into his office, sat down across from his massive oak desk, and placed the original, untampered property deed in front of him. "Mr. Caldwell," I said plainly, "I am selling Blackwood Cabin. I want 30% below market value. I want the transaction strictly in cash, and I require the sale to be finalized and effective immediately as of today." The old rancher looked at me, narrowing his eyes in suspicion. "Why the sudden change of heart, and why so cheap?" "Because my husband is attempting to steal it from me," I answered honestly. "And I would rather see this land go to a man who respects these woods than let him profit a single dime from my family." Mr. Caldwell's expression shifted from suspicion to a deep, silent understanding. He reached out, shook my hand, and called his lawyer into the room. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, I was no longer the owner of the cabin. Later that week, Nate excitedly announced that he was taking a 4-day weekend to go up to the mountain. He claimed he needed to finish the roof insulation before the winter snow arrived. I knew exactly what he was actually doing. He was taking Valerie up for a romantic, celebratory getaway, believing that he was now the legal co-owner of the property. I helped him pack his bags, kissed his cheek, and wished him a wonderful trip. I spent that Friday evening sitting in my living room, sipping a cup of chamomile tea, waiting for the inevitable. At exactly 8 o'clock, my cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed the number for the Mountain County Sheriff's Department. "Good evening, ma'am," a gruff voice said over the line. "This is Deputy Miller. I'm calling regarding a disturbance at the Blackwood property. We have a gentleman here named Nate who claims to be your husband. He is currently attempting to break the locks off the front door, stating that someone has stolen his furniture and occupied his house." "Oh dear," I replied, keeping my tone perfectly pleasant and entirely unbothered. "Nate is indeed my husband, Deputy, but there must be a terrible misunderstanding. He does not own that house. I sold the property entirely to Mr. Caldwell on Tuesday morning. Nate has absolutely no legal right to be there." There was a brief, heavy pause on the line. I could hear shouting in the background. "I see," the deputy said, his tone shifting to a strict professional register. "Well, Mr. Caldwell's ranch hands are currently on the property, and they are pressing charges for trespassing and vandalism." "You have to do your job, Deputy," I said softly. "Have a safe night." I hung up the phone. The fallout was wonderfully quiet and completely devastating. Nate and Valerie had arrived at the cabin expecting a romantic weekend, only to find the locks changed, Valerie's cheap furniture thrown onto the front lawn, and a group of large, unamused ranch hands occupying the porch. Nate, blinded by his own arrogance and believing his fake quitclaim deed protected him, had thrown a massive tantrum and called the police himself. When the deputy informed him that the property had been legally sold days ago and that his paperwork was entirely worthless, Nate was publicly humiliated in front of his mistress. He was placed in the back of a squad car for trespassing, leaving Valerie stranded in the freezing mountain air with her belongings scattered across the dirt. Valerie realized in that exact moment that Nate was not a wealthy property owner but a broke, manipulative liar. She called a friend to pick her up, blocked his number, and completely abandoned him at the local precinct. By the time Nate finally found a ride back to the city on Sunday morning, he no longer worked in the door of our rented apartment. I had changed the locks, packed his clothes into garbage bags, and left them neatly on the curb. I left a single folder on top of the bags containing the divorce papers and a printed photograph of him kissing Valerie on the cabin porch. Nate thought he could use my gentle nature as a weapon to dismantle my life. He assumed that avoiding conflict meant I lacked a spine. He learned the hard way that a woman who avoids shouting does not lack strength. She simply prefers to let the harsh, unforgiving reality of a closed door do all the talking for her.